Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I understand that I'm among the last few speakers here. I don't know where, but you've probably been sitting here all day. I've decided not to use PowerPoint because if you have to use PowerPoint at this stage, there's probably very little power and no point. So you're probably between myself and dinner. I did want to acknowledge a very special guest that I have here. It's the first time in my life that I have brought my 11-year-old daughter, okay? And I think she qualifies to be the youngest person in this room. Anybody younger than 11 here? Maybe you can give her a hand so that she's sitting right there. I wanted to show her this wonderful museum, so we get to look at this museum afterwards. What I wanted to share with you in the next 6 or 7 minutes is why this topic of security is super, super important. It's a lot like the medical field where you're treating diseases. There's two categories of people who are hacked and people who don't know as yet they're going to be hacked, okay? And you have to be in a state just like the way in which you think about a disease. If you met somebody who told you, I will never get sick in the future, okay? You'd probably look at them and say, yeah, let's see if that ever lasts, okay? So what you do is you protect yourself from the possibility and then do the best you can. And then there are things you can do. You probably want to eat a healthy diet. You probably want to keep yourself reasonably medically fit. You want to probably avoid, places where there's diseases. You want to protect yourself during times of outbreak. And it's a very similar way in which you can think about security today as the way in which the medical world is approached. So what I want to give you is just some very simple things. Unfortunately, technology has made this really, really complicated, okay? And if you went and studied the security technology industry, it feels like setting up a whole bunch of pills. Imagine if when you got up in the morning, you said you have to eat 500 pills to stay healthy, okay? It would probably take you till noon to actually make that happen. But unfortunately, when you'd go and talk to the technology vendors, there's 500, maybe 5,000 vendors all saying they're doing one little piece that's so important in security. And you're like, listen, I cannot take that many pills. So in much the same way, one of the first things us as technology providers have to do, and this goes from Palo Alto to if you're in Berlin or Bangalore or Beijing, okay, is make security baked more and more into the infrastructure of technology as opposed to having this phenomenon of 500 different pills. And we believe that the best thing we can do to you is the same way that you bake vitamins into your diet. Okay, you eat a healthy food, it avoids you having to take 500 different vitamins. And that's one of the key parts. And us as larger and larger technology players, VMware has been one of the fastest growing technology companies, software. We're about $8 billion in revenue, $45 billion in market cap, and the fastest growing company now, 5th largest. But us and many others, Microsoft, I think was up here, Oracle, SAP, these are 3 or 4 other large software companies, IBM. We owe it to you to ensure that we bake it more and more to the infrastructure. We are sort of the biggest company known in the data center. So we spend a lot of time ensuring that the hypervisor, the technology we built, is incredibly bringing security into it. So that's the first thing that I want to leave you with. You should require your technology vendors, especially if they're larger, not to come out with what feels like 500 vitamins, but baking it into their infrastructure the same way that you bake it in your diet. Secondly, it will still require you to have certain supplemental vitamins. So you may have a group of a healthy diet, but you still probably need to take a little bit of vitamin A or vitamin D, or depending on things. And this represents, beyond the technology infrastructure, a few set of companies that are going to be highly specialized in security. And sometimes they may come, they may go in particular areas. And our belief is that you probably will need to invest in, other than in infrastructure, certain types of companies that are highly relevant to a particular area. It might be in the network, it might be in the endpoint, it might be cloud. Those are typically the 3 areas of where security spend is happening: the network, the endpoint, or the cloud. And the goal should be that you have a fewer set of external or smaller vendors, because most of it over time is getting baked in the infrastructure. But the larger players won't always get this right, which is why you need some supplemental entrepreneurial activity. But our hope is that you're never presenting to a customer 500 of them, because that's too much for them to be able to handle. And then the third and final piece is, even if you have got a good diet, okay, and if you have taken your few supplemental vitamins, you still need to do something called hygiene, which is brush your teeth, right? A good diet, vitamins doesn't save you from taking a bath or whatever have you. So there are certain rules of cyber hygiene we recommend that people adopt. And the more that we can educate people on these forms of cyber hygiene. We've written a white paper on cyber hygiene. We'd welcome every one of you downloading. But I'll give you some examples of these, which are just the do's and don'ts. You never want to send your username and password in clear text. Okay? Now, you might say that's pretty obvious, but that was one of the reasons for the hack of the DNC last year. A username and password sent, I forgot what my username and password is, so I send a text message to my assistant saying, how do I get into iCloud? The assistant replies back on email. You've got that now. When your email gets hacked, your username and password's out there. That's a good example. You probably don't want to do that. Increasingly, multi-factor authentication is something that all of us should start to adopt in our law, especially in enterprise systems. Now, people say, listen, it's too much of a hassle. I don't remember my usernames and passwords. I've got to put them in some file, and if I don't put them in a file, it's in a piece of paper. Increasingly, this device, becomes your second factor of authentication. Because today, with fingerprint and retina scan, you would have to physically cut off my thumb and pluck my eye out to get Sanjay Poonen. Okay? You may do one of them. Pretty unlikely you'll do both of them. Okay? In terms of replicate. That's my second. In addition to your password having a second factor of authentication. And almost all consumer websites are doing this, but we encourage multi-factor authentication into all of your enterprise systems. It is a good thing to have. You can still achieve the goal of single sign-on and all of these ease of accessing systems, but with multi-factor authentication. Okay, and these are examples of cyber hygiene. I'm going to give you another. Encryption. When you see a number of the places, now I don't know the details, I'm still getting a readout on what happened with Equifax. Okay? But if you look at many of these places where systems were hacked, behind the system that was hacked was a database of stuff that was not encrypted. So you could go very quickly, once you got into the system, to a bunch of stuff that was in the database that was not encrypted. And I know people have said, well, it's too much of a hassle, this performance, but right now you should require your cloud providers, you should require your database providers, you should require your systems as much as possible to keep data for sure, but maybe even metadata encrypted. And then as you think about some of the other factors of how you continue to, I'll give you one final aspect of cyber hygiene. Keep your systems reasonably patched. If you look at what happened in WannaCry or Petya, and much of what happened, many of these were older Windows systems that people just refused to patch. Okay? And today, whether it's Microsoft or Apple, Android, every one of the larger vendors are getting better and better at providing systematic patch updates. To this now you'd say, listen, why is that the case, that they've got to do it as frequently? But that will hopefully, as we get more and more rigid, it will get baked into the system. I think iOS is a much safer operating system than the first version of Windows. Okay? And as a result, there's potentially fewer hacks there. Windows 10 is a much safer operating system than the original version of Windows. So the larger vendors are getting better at that, but you have to patch your system. So that, ladies and gentlemen, in just a few minutes, is how I would encourage you to think about security. Number one, require your vendors to bake it into the infrastructure as opposed to 500 new vitamins you got. Number two, add on supplemental vitamins. These are startups, but not 500 of them. Maybe it's 10, 15. Third, once you've done that, don't forget about some fundamental rules of cyber hygiene. For example, don't send your username and password in clear text. Thank you very much. I wish you all a great conference.